I know it's a crazy week with Newfront, so I appreciate everybody taking the time to come by today. Before we get started, I want to talk about for a minute or two is what is a programmatic 401? Quite simply, it's a chance to educate. Educate between 4 common groups that all work together. So today in attendance we have agencies, we have brands, we have ad tech partners, and we have publishers. And the goal of it is, when you think about digital, you see the growth numbers. This year alone, I think we're going to do $50 billion in digital spend in the US, $10 billion of which will be in programmatic. That being said, there's still some significant challenges. And if you think about the challenge, you have to look to what the common goal is. The common goal is, how do we provide the cleanest way for brands to interact with quality content? It's really what the Newfronts are all about. Today we're going to tackle 4 issues. The first of which is viewability. Second, fraud. Third, attribution. And fourth, we're going to take a look to the future. Everything that this week is based on, which will be connected television. To move forward, as we work throughout the day, a little housekeeping. For those of you in the back, we do have chairs, so please fill in as we go out. There's some chairs in the front as well. But to kick things off, I'm going to bring up Alex Kantrowitz, Alex is a reporter for Ad Age. I had to call him in because we're going to have Brian O'Kelly and Brian Lesser on the first panel, and I thought it would be strange to have Brian. So Alex is going to come up. As Alex comes up, I want to introduce Brian O'Kelly. There's no better place than AppNexus to host this event. When you think about the concept of bringing the truth to digital, which we believe is what we should do, if you look at the sign on the way in, the mission of AppNexus is simple: making a better internet. And why wouldn't we do that together? Brian was crowned the king of ad tech. He's the founder and CEO of AppNexus, and we're very appreciative to be at this event. The other introduction I'd like to make is the person who signs my paycheck, Brian Lesser, who is the global CEO of Xaxis. For those of you who don't know, Xaxis is in 43 different markets. We have 2,700 clients globally. And these 2 distinguished gentlemen are going to provide the roadmap for the future of technology. No pressure on that one. Thank you. Alex, take it away.
All right. Well, one of the things that Brian told me before we started this, and sort of what we agreed to beforehand, was I would be off the record. To me, that's pretty exciting. Usually doing everything on the record, I say something stupid, it gets in some other publication, and then my career slowly takes a downturn. So nobody's going to report what I say today, which is great. And then also, we got 2 CEOs of companies, and we know how CEOs like to talk. Everybody likes to give very sanitized and non-controversial answer. And so today we're going to stay away from that. I have promises from both of you guys, right?
Absolutely.
No comment. So let's start with you, Brian O'Kelly. Right now, ad tech is in a bit of a hard time. Wall Street has really been unforgiving of ad tech stocks. There's a lot of stocks that are plunging at the moment. Others are performing pretty poorly. It's led to an environment where exits just aren't happening anymore. There's been 1 ad tech IPO since July 2014, and that's been MaxPoint Digital. We haven't seen the names that we might have expected, such as AppNexus, or any of the demand-side platforms like Turn or MediaMath. What do you make of this situation? Is this going to fundamentally hurt ad tech businesses if they raised a lot of money, for instance, and seem to be headed towards an exit, and now maybe they can't?
So I would question what you said, actually. I think if you look back to, say, 5 years ago, at the number of public ad tech companies, period, it was pretty close to 0. What we have now is a vibrant ecosystem of ad tech companies that have been able to be public. Some have done extremely well. If you look at Criteo, worth $2.6 billion, I mean, that's one of the most successful ad tech companies in history. It's thriving in the public markets. Other companies perhaps weren't the multi-billion-dollar companies they hope to be, but you're still looking at a number of companies that have successfully exited both the private markets. There's a whole bunch of people who made a lot of money selling to Oracle, selling to other major companies in the past couple of years. I mean, we've seen more successful ad tech in the last 5 years than we have ever before. I don't think success in the public markets, in other words, reflects success of businesses. I hope that you don't judge an AppNexus, for instance, about whether we're public or not as to the success of a business. We've been growing extremely fast, we're profitable, we have an extraordinary community of employees worldwide. We've been innovating more than I think any company, public or private, in this space. You also see a resurgence of the major internet companies, of Facebook, of Google, of Amazon, investing into ad tech. Can anyone name the largest non-US ad tech company out there? Takers? Awake? I'm going to go for Alibaba. $4 billion of revenue, all of it from advertising. You can, buy and sell stuff on Alibaba for free. You only pay for advertising. This entire business, this Goliath, is completely built on advertising. And they believe that the core of their business is Alimama, which is their awesome name for their advertising platform. So what we have is some of the biggest, most important companies in the world that are, for all intents and purposes, ad tech companies. So I'd say, Alibaba is a great example of the thriving ad tech industry. And I think that, every major internet company right now on their earnings calls are talking about ad tech. Twitter yesterday. Now, their stock tanked, but
yeah, that's not a bad example to give. Their stock went down 20% after.
But what did they talk about? Ad tech.
Right.
So I think that the fact that this is so central, that there's so much innovation in platforms, there's so much innovation in companies, means that this is the, probably the most important time in the history of ad tech. We can't judge that by volatility in stock prices.
Yeah, so let me ask one follow-up question, and I'll get to Brian Lesser. So if the environment is so good, why haven't companies been going public?
Well, this is not an ad tech question. This is a question for private companies overall. The answer is simple. Valuations of private companies are higher than they've been ever. The ability for a private company to raise money is greater than ever before. Last year, AppNexus raised over $100 million in what's now being called a private IPO, meaning it's the same amount of money we would have raised going public at a very significant valuation. We didn't have to go public to get the kind of liquidity and access to capital that companies used to have to. When Microsoft went public 40 years ago, they were a small, unprofitable, high-growth, risky company that was earlier stage than AppNexus is now, which is not to say that 40 years from now will be Microsoft. It's to say the market has evolved because of things like Starbucks that make it more expensive for companies to be public, and there's many more investors who want to invest in private companies. So I don't think the going public is a milestone for a high-potential early-stage company the way it was 20 or 30 years ago.
But you'll eventually have to pay those investors back. So how are you going to do that?
Well, there's plenty of ways for investors to make money. My job, and I think all of our jobs, is to build successful, sustainable companies that make advertising work better. And so as long as we do that, there'll be exits for everyone at the appropriate time. But really, it doesn't drive a whole lot of our behavior in the short term.
Brian Lesser, what do you think?
Yeah, so I was hoping you would redirect me, because I think you don't want to confuse the fact that investors are getting smarter about ad tech with ad tech not being a viable segment of the economy, especially the advertising economy. I think what you're seeing is that companies that went out very early went out to an investor community that didn't necessarily understand ad tech, and they certainly didn't understand programmatic. So they ascribed value to these companies because they used big and sexy words like programmatic, or we use rocket science to build advertising systems. But as investors get more savvy, ultimately you see the valuations coming back to the norm, or where they should be. And that's, I think, good for the industry that investors are getting more savvy, and I think it mirrors something that we're seeing, which is clients are getting more savvy. And clients are starting to invest in programmatic in ways that they never did before, not just in learning about it, but really digging in and understanding how is programmatic going to change my business, and what can I be doing better. So the market's getting smarter, clients are getting smarter, and you're seeing companies that went out very early that maybe didn't necessarily have a lot of value see that reflected in stock price.
Okay, so let me run one theory by both of you guys that I think is responsible for the downturn in stocks, and we can discuss it. So one of the theories that I'm toying around with is that investors see, like what Brian O'Kelly referenced, big social companies like Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, deciding that they want, and I know you guys have a partnership with LinkedIn, so that might be a bad example, but they see these big social companies with logged in users and better data than anybody else on the internet now starting to sell ads across the entire web, not just on their platforms. So you had this whole segment of ad tech companies that were saying we're going to make inventory on the web more valuable, and now you have social companies with better data saying, hey, actually we can do it, and we can do it better than the other folks. So my theory is that Wall Street and, I don't know, maybe other investors see the value in the ad tech world coming out of the social companies and maybe not necessarily the independent companies. Brian O'Kelly, what do you think about that?
Anybody remember a company called Yahoo? There's an exclamation point, Y-A-H-O-O exclamation point. In 2007, Yahoo had 12% of all time spent on the internet. That means either 12% of you spent all of your time on Yahoo, or all of you spent 12% of your time on Yahoo, mostly playing fantasy sports, as far as I know. But the question was asked in 2007 when they bought Right Media, and they were on this ad tech buying spree, and everyone said, is Yahoo going to take over the internet? They'd raised their CPMs 20% year over year over year over year. They had the most extraordinary pricing and yield management technology. You know, this was a portal that was going to eat the world. And they were investing something like $250 million a year on R&D and ad tech. And we all looked at that, and said, wow, Yahoo has all the pieces. They have the largest, in 2007, a $400 million behavioral targeting business based on their data set. They were monetizing more behavioral data themselves than the rest of the internet combined. And so you could go back to that point in time and say, they had 97% market share of the programmatic space, and they had everything necessary to go run the table. But you look at it today, and I think most of us would agree that Yahoo hasn't delivered on that promise. And I think Google, 2 years ago, had we been having this conversation, you would have said, look, Google's going to run the table in ad tech. They've got DFA, they've got DFP, they've got incredible data sets, they own video, YouTube, Google property, and you'd say there's nobody who can possibly confront Google and ad tech. And now today, I think the conversation is, well, hey, Facebook, dude, they have tons of data. They have an ad server. My experience, having been in this space for a long time, over a decade, is that this is a very complex, fragmented space, partially because of consumer behavior. And when consumers decide that Yahoo isn't cool anymore and start spending their time on Snapchat, it forces everyone to readjust how they think about the web. In fact, the web is the wrong term. That's me being old. Really, it's about the internet. And is messaging even the internet? I mean, the whole messaging business is completely new. And I think that's something that Google hasn't figured out. It's why Facebook is doing WhatsApp and things like that. So in this dynamic world, will data matter? Absolutely. But will those companies be able to translate a data asset into winning ad tech? I'm very skeptical. I think that marketers and agencies need independent platforms that can help them allocate media and make smart decisions in an incredibly complex, fragmented world. It's one reason our partnership with Xaxis is so important, because we believe that you need technology that can handle the complexity, that can handle the fragmentation, that can, let's say, grade somebody else's homework. Letting Facebook grade its own homework doesn't really seem like a good idea. And so we're going to see many independent platforms solving increasingly complex marketing problems, leveraging the data sets and the assets that these media companies have.
So, by the way, let's trace the Yahoo track, right? It got cool, got acquired a nice company, and then somebody left. And then
Jerry Yang was important, but I don't think he was like the core of Yahoo's success. Yeah. But I agree.
I was referring to somebody that went and started a company called AppNexus, but let's move on. So I think that there's a difference between the fall of Yahoo and Google struggles. Well, they're not struggling, but and what we're seeing now.
I think they are struggling. I think Google is struggling more than it's ever struggled before on multiple dimensions.
Okay, we'll get to that next, but I have one thing I want to say, and then we can move on.
I want Brian to talk.
And this question is going to go to Brian Lesser, right? So the mobile thing, I think, is a fundamental change here, because when you were dealing in a desktop world, Yahoo could become less cool and then lose share. But it's not about whether Facebook is going to become less cool. It's about the fact that traditional ad tech can't connect the user identity on a desktop device and a mobile device. And Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, they can all do that because they have all this login data. So isn't that a way for them? I mean, not only do they have that, they have all the behavioral data and they know everything about people, their first name, their last name, their jobs. So doesn't that make a difference between now and the era Brian O'Kelly just described?
Yeah, it absolutely makes a difference. I mean, let's face it, data is an extremely important component to targeting consumers. And every advertiser in the room knows that the most powerful data is their first-party data. So what they know about their own consumer, what they know about people that come to their site, is not only the data that performs the best, but it's the seed to something much more important, which is modeling other audiences that look like the audience that you already own. And there's lots of ways to leverage that. Your point about mobile and the fact that it's hard to connect cookies to a mobile idea is a challenge for us, but it's not impossible. I think your statement was you can't do it. Well, you can do it. We do it with partners. AppNexus bought a company called Media Glue recently that specializes in connecting those two things, so connecting a cookie ID with a mobile ID.
How good are those companies?
Well, we don't have to get into the weeds, but it depends on whether it's a probabilistic model, a deterministic model. But we've tested every single one of them, and we know, who is good at that and who's not good at it. Mm-hmm. Now, is Google going to be good at that, and Facebook? Of course they're going to be, because they've got their own first-party data. But I think advertisers have to be careful that they're not working with a company that's fundamentally at odds with the advertiser themselves. And really, when you're an advertiser, you want the power of your data, you want to model that into other audiences, but then you want it available across all inventory. So you want universal access to inventory and universal access to other third-party data sources that will help you model those audiences. And I think you also need a delivery mechanism. So, I would argue that Facebook, who's a good partner of ours at Xaxis, has a long way to go on Atlas. Their relaunch of Atlas could be boiled down to people, not cookies, which is brilliant. And I think that there's a lot of leverage there over Google, but then you need the delivery mechanism. And if you look at Atlas's market share in comparison to DoubleClick, it's nowhere close. And inertia is a very difficult thing to overcome in the ad tech business. So Google's got incredible market share in terms of their ad tech, but they're dealing with faster competitors and companies like AppNexus. Their data is not nearly as good as Facebook, but Facebook doesn't have those ad tech chops. So I don't think this is as simple as, listen, there's going to be 2 or 3 media and technology monoliths and all your money's going to go there. And I don't think that's in advertisers' best interest.
Okay, fair enough. So Brian O'Kelly is ready to dish on Google. So why are they in trouble right now?
I think Google is a search company, period. I, of course, admire self-driving cars. I look forward to not driving one someday. I think that their display business is a good distraction. It really is. At the end of the day, if they had to choose between search and display, they'd choose search. And so would every one of us. It's the best internet business model ever. The problem with search is pretty simple, which is search behavior is changing as we use our mobile devices more. That's why the portals are struggling. You don't have a portal on your phone. How many of you, when you wake up in the morning, go to the home page of your phone? Well, it doesn't work that way, Brian. We have apps, right? And that's the problem that the portals have, which is there's no more portal. And for search, I don't click on search and go find something. I click on Yelp when I want to find a Starbucks to get free Wi-Fi. I go, click on, actually I don't use very many good apps, but, that was my only good example. But I don't search, I go to Wikipedia. So what I guess I'm saying is that Google's challenge is that if you go back to consumer behavior driving everything, we are all here because of consumer behavior. Our business is influencing consumer behavior towards the brands that we're advertising for. When consumer behavior changes, we have to change how we advertise, and content consumption changes. So the best trick that Google ever pulled was convincing us that search ads were content. I cannot convince my mother that the first two things you see on Google are ads. I can't. She's like, but they're so relevant to me. And this is a woman who types eBay in the search box to go to eBay. I mean, she types eBay and clicks on the link that says eBay, and Google makes like $1. I mean, it's the best business model ever, right? I am not kidding, you know? And I'm actually proud that she's using a computer. But, you know, when that behavior changes and my mom just clicks on the eBay app, Google loses not just the money, but it loses its touch point with the consumer. And no longer is Google the portal for the web, because that's really what Google's become. It's the new Yahoo. Not to diss on either company, but people go to Google as their homepage, they type in what they want to do, and Google gets them there. That is not the future of the internet. And so Google's fundamentally challenged because if you believe that data and all of those users are the key to advertising, which I think to some extent is true, what happens when it's not a must transit to get there? I think Facebook's actually equally challenged. I personally have stopped using Facebook for almost anything except for, you know, when one of my friends has a baby and I want to go like write a nice comment like, your baby is the cutest baby I've ever seen on Facebook, which I say to everyone. So for all of you who are my Facebook friends, I'm sorry. But Facebook doesn't know anything about me at all, except that I like babies, which is sort of weird. And so I think this is the challenge for these companies is they are so dependent. Look at Twitter. They can't match everyone in the world. They don't know anything except for those people who are active. And so Google has hit the peak of the rapid growth that makes them an attractive place to work.
Okay, we have a minute left, so if you don't mind. Brian Lesser, the floor is yours. Do you agree with that? I personally still search all the time. I have great apps. I search all the time. I use Gmail. I use Google Maps. I mean, I don't really see exactly eye to eye. How about you?
I would say I don't have as extreme a point of view on Google. We're one of the biggest buyers of AdX in the world at Xaxis. So last year we spent close to $800 million. A lot of that was spent on Google AdX. So I think as a media company, Google is very, very strong. They're one of the most, if not the most powerful media company in the world. I don't consider them an ad tech company. And we work very hard at Xaxis not to use their technology because, again, we don't want Google to be grading its own homework. And we don't think that it's in the best interest of clients to put all of their data and all of their campaigns in the same technology that's powering a publishing business. So we admire Google, we admire what they've done with YouTube and their other media properties, but we think that clients should think very clearly about divorcing a media company from a technology company, because there are certainly lots of other alternatives for where to put your data and how to run your campaigns.
Check that out, 20-minute discussion kicking off a conference about ad tech, and we didn't mention fraud once, but I think that's next. So let's give the Bryans a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.